welcome to another college football DFS live before lock here at Awesemo.com. We have a ton to get to on this Saturday morning. That's why we went 30 seconds early. Get a jump on it. That will make all the difference here. A ton of games, 14 of these bad boys. And to break it down with me, I bring in my friend, my co-host, Matt Gajeski. We are in the thick of the season. The weeks are rolling. Week 9 upon us, Matt. A lot of games to get to.
Yeah, a lot of good games. Really excited for the Michigan State game and see who is going to end up undefeated there. Obviously, really big implications in the Big Ten West yet to unfold. These teams still all have to face each other. As for DFS, we got a bunch of really bad quarterbacks on this slate. It's going to be a weird one to break down.
It's going to be fascinating, and there's so many ways that we can break it down, and we're going to start with one of our favorites. Sponsoring the show once again, Prize Picks. If you've not been over there, let me just tell you a little bit about them. Prop-based contest, really easy to get started, and they're offering a fantastic bonus. So basically, you're just going to pick 2, 3, 4, or 5 players on the board, and you're going to try to go, will they go over or under their projected scores? Say you pick 5 and you get them all right, you're going to get up to 10x your entry fees. And of course, they have college football, but they've got the NBA, they've got the NFL. Baseball is winding down, but they do have that. All the sports that you want, they have over there. Go to the App Store, download in there Google Play, make your first deposit using the promo code Awesemo. You're going to get an instant deposit match of up to $100. They have so many different types of props over there. One of my favorites is picking on our friend Spencer Petras. His passing yards prop is at 172.5. I don't think that he should get a 100-yard bonus for passing with the way he throws. I'm going to go under that number. They play Wisconsin. What do you think about Iowa today?
It's a really tough spot for them, and they're not a team that plays well from behind. So that works right into the favor of the bet you like, under for Petras. Even if they do have elevated pass attempts, he hasn't shown the ability to complete them. And I think it's a spot against a very strong Wisconsin defense where you can comfortably look under there. I liked Caleb Williams early in the week for his passing yards. They've shot up a bunch now. He's still at 244, which I think you could hit over on against Texas Tech. And then I would take a look at Anthony Richardson. Not sure what it's coming in at, but he was named the starter for Florida today. So you might be able to buy low on him.
No doubt. That's going to be a fascinating game. See what he can do against that defense. Another one I looked at was Christian Beale Smith. I just think that Wake Forest is live to hang 50 or 60 points here. His rushing yards prop is 0.5. To me, he's very likely to score on the ground. Everyone on Wake Forest is likely to score. They just hung 70 points on Army last week.
Yeah, I like that. I like that too. And they use Beal Smith more in competitive games, which this projects to be more competitive than the Army. I know the Army one ended up being pretty competitive, but to your point, I think he gets work.
I don't understand how or why this stays competitive. I'm a little nervous because I did bet Wake, but in due time, we will get there. We've got 14 games. It's time to dive in. We start in the ACC, not with Wake though. We start with Miami and Pittsburgh. This is a 9-point spread, an over-under of 61. Pittsburgh should be undefeated. They lost to Western Michigan. That's their only blemish. Miami is running out of QBs. I believe they're on their 3rd QB. So talk to me about the Hurricanes first. What do we expect from this signal caller? He's been actually better than I thought he would be, but is that good enough to target him on such a big slate?
The total in this game is pretty good, so I think you could get to him. He's somewhat mobile, and I think that just comes mainly from scrambling. But he had a really good game last week against NC State, threw for over 300 yards. I think the issue is in his full body work, he's still only completing 59% of his passes, and he's pretty reliant on big plays here. This is going to be the toughest defense he's faced yet. So I still think it's an uphill battle for him. What it comes down to is this is one of the better games overall to target on the slate in terms of totals. So I think even as the underdog, he should at least draw some consideration. But kind of the theme of this slate overall is DraftKings price up everybody. And FanDuel did this too, but not as much. So you really have to make concessions today. And I'm not sure if Van Dyke at 6,700 is a concession. I think he's still pretty expensive for his role.
Anything else for this team? I mean, they're not massive underdogs, but almost 10 points, almost double digits. If they have some success, and we've seen teams, Western Michigan hung a ton of points on this Pitt's defense. How does Miami score? Is there another player worth targeting?
Jalen Knighton has a massive workload in the backfield. They lost Cameron Harris. They lost Donald Chaney. So they're just down to basically their last viable running back. So he's going to see a large workload. Again, they're big underdogs. But he's averaged 21 touches in the last 3 games. He came off a suspension, so he didn't play in the first 4 games of the year. But Knighton has a massive workload. I like him as a GPP target in that upper price range because I think we will see some condensed ownership on like the Travis Dyes of the world. And then in the receiving game, Rambo's their alpha, but he's just too expensive. If you're paying all the way down, Keyshawn Smith is somebody you could look to because we're starved for value on this slate. He's the clear wide receiver 3, and he might be the wide receiver 2. They've reduced Mike Harley snaps quite a bit recently. So Keyshawn Smith in GPPs, I think, is a solid run back from this Miami side.
You got Pickett on the other side, Addison, and correct me if I'm wrong, warming up, but we don't have confirmation. You've got Mac. Then you've got a somewhat crowded backfield. Talk to me about this Pitt team and who we should target.
Yeah, so they're both dealing with concussions, so they're dressed. That means they should be playing unless it's just like pure gamesmanship, but that doesn't really make a lot of sense. They're going through concussion protocol, not like testing hamstring. So it's a black and white situation, and it looks like they're both going to play. Just continue to monitor that through warmups. But Pickett's a little overpriced on this slate. You can still get to him in stacks because the game environment's so good. Miami's been in a bunch of shootouts this year, which is reflected in the total. Pickett's mobile, and he's having a career year as a passer, averaging well over 300 yards. So there is a ceiling. He's pretty easy to stack too. You have Jordan Addison as the clear alpha, assuming he plays. Taysier Mack is a reliable veteran, plays a lot in and out of the slot. So he's kind of your middling price range guy. But lately, they've been using Melquise Stovall, the Hawaii transfer, playing ahead of Shockey Jacques and Jared Wayne. So again, in a slate where we are starved for value, Melquise Stovall opens up a little bit, and his route rate jumped to 61% last week. He's now had 4 targets in back-to-back weeks. Middling efficiency with him, but he's one of these players near the stone min that I think you can get to. Not with confidence, but it at least opens up the studs in the slate.
Yeah, just 3,100 on DraftKings, 54 on FanDuel. I bet Pittsburgh. I used Pittsburgh actually as a money line piece in a couple of parlays. I think that Pittsburgh does win the game at home. Anything else?
I bet it too.
Okay, let's do it. Go Pitt, keep it rolling. Texas, Baylor. Baylor's a 2.5-point favorite. Similar over under 61.5. I see. This Texas team has been tough. They've been a pain point for me. I thought they should have beat Oklahoma State. They could not. They blew the game against Oklahoma, but they certainly have got some weapons, starting with Bijan Robinson. He's 11,000 on FanDuel, 9,700 on DraftKings. Where is he in the priority list today with so many games?
Pretty low. It's pricing. He on DraftKings specifically, he's just priced in a range where he essentially needs to score you like 50 points. Even a 30-point game for him is not really getting you there because he's so expensive. And he certainly has that in his range of outcomes, but how many times does he actually hit it? And then with tough pricing everywhere else on the slate, you are making such big concessions putting Bijan in your lineup. And you can say this about a lot of the 9K plus backs like Breece Hall, Deuce Vaughn. It's really hard to build lineups with them in there. With that said, this game is another one with a solid total. And as we'll get to later, there's a lot of really bad games on this slate. So I think you want to prioritize Texas to some degree, especially in stacks. Casey Thompson stacks are okay. If they get down in games is how he accesses his ceiling. He needs those extra pass attempts. He's been really efficient, completing 65% of them for 9.3 yards per attempt. It's just he's only averaging 19.9 attempts per game. They've completely taken the air out of the ball and tried to run Bijan, but they're underdogs, so they might have to throw the ball. If they do, Xavier Worthy's the clear number 1 here, and then you have Joshua Moore operating as the number 2. Outside of that, there's nobody else that's seeing a consistent role worth stacking. So it's a 4-man race. It's just very unfortunate that Bijan's so expensive.
Yeah, with Whittington out of the picture, it's a little clear on the outside. So I get that. On the other side, I mean, there's been some slates. I know they're all different, but you've told me in the past that Jerry Bohannon has made some of your teams and you've looked to him 7,200 and 9K respectively. You've got guys like Thornton and Snead on the outside. What do you do with Baylor? They are slight favorites here. Does that mean Abram Smith in the backfield, or can we still go to the passing attack?
Yeah, I'll tell you what, those Jerry Bohannon lineups were not good. I'll tell you that. He's the game
I didn't
manager.
see them at the top.
Yeah, they weren't at the top. He's game manager extraordinaire. It's similar to Casey Thompson with Texas, where their preferred style of play is just slamming their backs into the back of the offensive line and taking the air out of the ball. So with Baylor favored here, Bohannon isn't a preferred play for me, but he accesses his ceiling if they get down in the game. So with a good game environment overall, I think they're GPP plays. In the run game, Abram Smith is kind of taken over for Tristan Ebner. Through the first 5-6 games, they just insisted on running this timeshare, but Ebner's been horribly inefficient, and Abram Smith just running laps around him. But last week, outsnapped Ebner 48-28. He's clearly out touching him now. So Abram Smith appears to become the lead back, and Texas allows over 200 per game to opposing rushers. So this is a decent spot to target Abram Smith. In the receiving game, same thing as Bohannon. You need them to get down to access the ceiling. Tyquan Thornton's the alpha, but unless they get down in games, he's just not seeing a ceiling in targets.
Abram Smith cash viable?
He's in the conversation because he's just a bit cheaper than those other backs. And the workload is not drastically different. It's just he is Tristan Ebner there, and a lot of these other backs don't. So it's a little bit risky, but I think you can.
Last question on the game, friend of the show, Slim. Can you go to Marcus Washington? He's only getting a couple targets a game. You attach him to some weird Casey Thompson stacks?
You could in massive tournaments, and anything low risk, I wouldn't do that. He's splitting time with Kelvonte Dixon. But again, we don't have any value. So I think Stovall's a little better, but not significantly.
Yeah, the cheap you from Pitt. I would agree. Cincinnati, this is one of the big spreads. There's not that many for 14 games, but this is one of them. Almost 4 touchdown favorite against Tulane, 61.5 point total. I feel like these teams already played somehow. It's all nonsense with Cincy's schedule. But talk to me about Ritter. Talk to me about Ford. You've got Pierce on the outside. I mean, Cincy at times has looked very impressive. I do think style points are going to count. Last week was not one of them, though. They beat Navy by 7 points. That's not a great, but as we know, Navy's a weird team. So do you think they get back to just demolishing here?
Yeah, I think so. And part of it comes down to the Tulane quarterback is hurt, which we'll get to. But there's just they're really difficult to target at their prices. Like Ford is now above 9K. So you run into the same problem that we just talked about with Bijan, except Ford doesn't have the volume. He's living off pure efficiency, averaging 18 touches per game, which is fine against these really bad AAC teams that Cincinnati continues to play. But Ritter, unless they get down in the game, they're so slow and so run heavy that he has no ceiling whatsoever. And he hasn't been involved in the run game this year. He has no games above 45 rushing yards, which just flat out isn't going to get you for a mobile, I guess you could call him game manager quarterback at this point. He doesn't have any games above 300 yards. Last year, he only went above 300 yards twice. So there's like a really bad ceiling for Ritter. With that said, their total is so big, implied team total that is, that Ritter still has to be in play. I think he's like a cash play where he has a really narrow range of outcomes, but he doesn't often access that ceiling.
Any interest? I know we don't target tight ends too often, but someone like Josh Wiley as a pay down option, even Leonard Taylor, are these just not good enough to get in the conversation?
I was getting a little bit of like Leonard Taylor in lineups, but once you get behind Alec Pierce or Michael Young, once you get past them, Leonard Taylor, Josh Wiley, Tyler Scott, Trey Tucker, they're all basically playing 50% of the snaps in a nasty rotation. So it's tough. You're just hoping you get, and then you're already playing in a low volume pass attack. So I think there's better options. Again, I would prefer Stovall to these guys.
On the other side, Pratt is in the protocol. So we'll see if he plays. Is he in play? If he doesn't, what happens?
I don't think so. There's just other better cheap dual threat quarterbacks on the slate with better totals. And that's really his game. If the Tulane quarterback gets there, it's off volume. They're pretty fast. They're pretty pass heavy, but both their signal callers are dual threats. So they would need rushing production. Ibieta is basically a carbon copy of Pratt with a smaller sample size. So perhaps he's worse. We don't really know, but their efficiency numbers are almost the same. They have almost the same rushing numbers. I don't really think it makes a big difference. And with their 17.5 total, it's not a team you're prioritizing in any way. They run nasty rotations at receiver and running back. So to save some time, I don't think any of them are viable. Like they're using 6 receivers pretty evenly. They use at least 2, maybe 3 running backs if Booker's involved. Sometimes he is, sometimes he isn't. And then they're playing against an elite Cincinnati defense. So they're just a team I'm Xing out.
Yeah, tough scene for Tulane. They get some credit for hanging tough against some teams. I don't think today is one of them. So there you go. You got Indiana and Maryland coming up here. Maryland's 4-point favorite, 48-point total. 2 teams that at moments I thought could be serious dark horses for the Big Ten. That just hasn't happened. Injuries, many other things. And let's start with Indiana. They talk about injuries, Penix, Tuttle. It's a mess. What's the status of the signal callers here? What do we expect to see? And are any of them in consideration?
I'm expecting them to go with their freshman, Donovan McCulley. He's a 4-star. If you guys don't know who he is, he's kind of this big, somewhat mobile quarterback. He's 6'5", 200 pounds. So he's got a lankier frame, but he is mobile. And I think he's just the presumed starter. He had Penix and Tuttle do some things at practice, but it's a lost season. They're both still dealing with injuries, so no real reason to rush him back. McCulley's really cheap and he's mobile and he's a complete unknown. And Maryland certainly doesn't have a good defense. So in tournaments, I think McCulley's completely fine. The biggest concern is they played Grant Gremmel as well last week and they could rotate, just not sure what they're going to do. But McCulley's a 4-star. Gremmel's like a dude that's been with the program for a little while. No real recruiting pedigree to him. So McCulley would be the guy I think gets the work, but you also could see them ride Stephen Carr. And they've done this a lot this year. They've tried to use Stephen Carr as a bell cow. He's just so inefficient behind a really bad Indiana offensive line that it requires absurd volume for him to get there. This is an easier matchup. Indiana has played the teeth of their defense, or of their schedule already this year. So Maryland is going to be a little bit of an easier opponent. So Carr perhaps gets there, but we've even seen his volume decrease of late. It's a tough sell for me, but I think Carr is in play. Fryfogel's also come down significantly. You just have no idea what you're getting with him because of the quarterback change.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention on the outside, Fryfogel and Hendershot. Who knows what this guy's going to give you? Can you go? You mentioned he's got some dual threat ability. Can he sneak in as a cheap quarterback for cash?
I don't think so. You just don't know if he's going to play the whole game.
On the other side, Maryland, they've got issues of their own. Certainly, they already lost one of their alphas on the outside, but they still have Tagovailoa. They still have Jarrett. They're slight favorite here. What do you expect? Is it Fleet Davis? Is it someone on the ground, or is it more of the passing attack?
Maryland's had a really high pass rate for a while now. And I think part of that, obviously in the beginning of the year, they wanted to pass with their elite options on the outside. They've now lost Demas and they've lost Jayshon Jones. And since then, they've been in really tough matchups. Like they've already played the strength of their schedule as well, which is going to ease up down the stretch. I think there's a chance that Maryland now just goes run heavier without two of their top three receivers. And Tagovailoa struggling mightily in the last couple of games. He's been held below 200 yards in two of the last three contests, which is not good. They're a little expensive based on some of these recent metrics we've seen. I mean, like Raheem Jarrett has been horrific as the new alpha receiver. He's only been targeted 6 times in the last 2 games, which is just flat out not going to get it done. Marcus Fleming, a guy I thought they might have as a price down option. He kind of ran ahead of everyone else as the wide receiver too, but he's up at 4,500. Like anybody who showed a pulse last week got priced up, which is just an extremely tight pricing slate.
What about Okonkwo?
He doesn't see a ton of volume. He does have 5 targets in back-to-back games, but his route rate is just a little bit north of like 50% on a week-to-week basis. So I think you could get to him. He's the same concerns as like a Jared and Tagovailoa. What happens if they just go pure run attack?
This is a weird game. I don't really know. I think there's a lot of unknowns, and anytime you have unknowns, it does create some interest, but with 14 of these, it's a little tough to get to these guys. So that's where it's a little tricky here. Maryland is bad though, so I wouldn't be stunned to see Indiana have some success. Anyway, Michigan State. This is probably the biggest game of the day. Not the best DFS one though. Wolverines 4-point favorite going into East Lansing. College game day is there. It's a big hoopla, 50.5 point total. We're going to find out. I'm very, very interested to see what Michigan can do here because they have an identity. They want to run the ball a lot with Quorum and Haskins, and that's what they do. They've done it in every game, and they've been very successful. Simple question, can they do that here against Michigan State?
I think they can. It's a really tough evaluation because both these teams have played an extremely easy slate of opponents. And with that, they've both been able to ride the run. It's a situation where one team is going to get down. They're likely going to be forced into a pass-friendly game script. Which one is it going to be? We saw that one time with McNamara this year. He only has one game above 200 yards. It was that Nebraska game, which was really tight. So he was just forced into elevated pass attempts. And he actually played well. So McNamara is cheap. If it's Michigan State that gets up in this game, Michigan may have to abandon the pass. And if you remember last year when this Michigan team was down, they were passing at a rate above 50%. They have the same OC. He's sensitive to game script. They've just played entirely with positive game script all year long. So I don't know. Contrarian tournaments, perhaps you could look at Michigan's quarterback and stack him. I wouldn't do it outside of the largest. And the same thing goes for Michigan State. If they get down in this game, their offensive coordinator and Mel Tucker have shown a willingness to pass too. And they're obviously projected to be down in the game. Peyton Thorne's efficient. And they have the two just straight up alphas. So I would rather stack Michigan State in the pass game. But overall, I'm expecting one of these teams to have a drastically higher pass rate than what we've seen on the year.
I do think it's kind of intriguing. McNamara's prize picks numbers 174.5. If Michigan loses the game, I think there's almost no chance that he doesn't clear this. And even if they win, I think there's opportunities for him to get there just on elevated volume against a competitive opponent. So take an eye on that.
He projects at 198 for us with no alternate game scripts. Like his median projection, assuming Michigan wins this game by 4.5, is 197.
There you go. So some value potentially there. You mentioned the alphas for Michigan State, but they've also got the Wake Forest transfer who's handling massive workloads. We haven't really seen Michigan State be way behind. They were in some battles here and there in some games. What do you make of Kenneth Walker today? Where does he fit in the running back room?
He's actually a pretty good price adjusted play just because so many of the bell cows are priced at an egregious price point. So I got a lot of Kenneth Walker. It makes me scared because Michigan is a good defense. Kenneth Walker has not shown anything in the pass game. Part of that because they've just played with such a lead this year. But Kenneth Walker, I mean, the routes being so low is a little bit scary. And I went back and tried to look at just route rate on the year. He is still very clearly their pass catching back. He's well ahead of Jordan Simmons. They're just not throwing the ball a lot. So that makes me believe in severe negative game script. If it were to happen, Kenneth Walker could luck his way into some targets. With that said, I think he's just based on price in consideration with a lack of alternatives. He's below 7K and there isn't another back with this workload in the price range. So he's viable in cash, I think, on DraftKings specifically. Tough matchup, but I think you just got to eat it at some point. There's just not better volume.
I mean, would he be, it relates right to the question of best running back 7K and under. Would it be Kenneth Walker potentially?
I think it has to be by default. He's in my cash lineup.
There you go.
I don't feel good about it. I do not feel good about it.
Well, that's a prerequisite to the slate, but I feel like no matter what, he's going to have 25 total touches. 24 and a half of them will probably be carries, but regardless, he's going to be quite busy. And I don't think that Michigan blows them out too often. I really don't. The total in this game I thought was a little high, but it seems to be holding. So it's not like these teams can't move the ball and there can't be points. I can't say the same thing about the next game though. The next game has set back us all, just as a society. Iowa, Wisconsin, 3-point favorite for you boys at home, 36.5 point total. I mean, come on. Go ahead. Talk about Petrus and Goodson and Laporta and whoever else is on this Iowa Hawkeyes offense.
Petrus is a straight X out play. Goodson is a bell cow back in a really tough matchup that's played with horrible offensive lines and really bad efficiency this year. So he's a volume-based play in GPPs. Again, in a low total game, bad matchup, really bad efficiency. But he's still averaging 22.4 touches per game. The only pass catcher that's worth talking about is Sam Laporta. He's below 4K, and we have no value on the slate. So I when I was running some optimal, Sam Laporta popped up in some. I X'd him out of my cash build, but he projects well for the price because we have no good volume plays that are very cheap. On the other side, Mertz is the same thing as Petrus. The DFS platform should pay you salary to roster them. Like you should get extra salary to get up to these elite backs if you take on these guys. There's just no way you play Mertz or Petrus. In the run game, Ches Malusi kind of reasserted himself over Braylon Allen. I feel that is a very fluid situation. Again, they crushed Purdue. And when the game was actually close, their previous game, Braylon Allen out-touched Malusi. It was basically a 50-50 timeshare. So no real feel there. If you want to take a stab, I think you can. But like Kenneth Walker's right in that price range. I don't really see a reason to do that. And then Kendrick Pryor on the other side, like he's averaging 4.9 targets. I mean, he's 3.3K. It's just a horrific matchup, but there's no value in the slate. None whatsoever.
I mean, yeah, this is a game. 36.5 is low, but I also think it's worthy of this game. So you mentioned a couple guys here. There's just simply no point in digging deeper in this game. I assume you would say.
No, we can save some time.
You guys didn't touch on Peyton Thorne. We talked about him briefly. I mean, go ahead. Give me a 5-second spiel on Peyton Thorne, Michigan State.
Yeah, same thing as McNamara. I mean, whatever team gets down in this game is going to be forced into elevated pass attempts, which could bring a ceiling. So I think Thorne is fine. I like him more than McNamara because he's the two alphas, Jalen Naylor and Jaden Reed. Naylor, between the two, is just still too cheap. Basically the same receiving volume, but way more targets for Naylor. He'd be the guy I played. And then you could punt there. Mosley's pretty cheap. So, I mean, you need some value.
No doubt about it. That's going to be, these Big Ten games are rough. This game is not great, but we're getting on the right track. Iowa State 7.5-point favorite in Morgantown, 48-point total. Iowa State, they got the job done. I wasn't overly impressed. They beat a Oklahoma State team, and if we weren't pressed for time, I would go into a long rant about storming the field as 7-point favorites at home after you've already had 2 losses. But I'm not going to do that today. Anyway, this is still an Iowa State team that is over a touchdown favorite on the road. You've got Breece Hall, you've got Purdy, Kohler, Hutchinson. Is there anyone for the Cyclones that you want to make a priority today?
This is a team that's actually not priced up outside of Breece Hall. So Breece Hall, it's the same thing as Bijan and Jerome Ford. He's just super, super expensive, and you'd need like a 3-4 touchdown game for him to pay this off with the way the rest of the salaries shake out on the slate. Purdy's not that expensive. He's been super efficient as a passer. The best season of his career, I think. 75% completion percentage, nearly 9 yards per attempt, but he's only eclipsed 30 passing attempts twice all year. So I don't know. You Campbell guys out there, I don't get it. I think he's a bad coach. I know they had the good season last year, but like they continue to slam Breece Hall into the offensive line and fail to use their best asset, which is Purdy. He's mobile, and I think Purdy's one of the safer plays in that price range. So I think for like cash games, his range of outcomes is narrower. He's somebody that I like kind of in that mold. But again, I don't know what the ceiling is because their coaching staff can't evaluate their talent very well.
It's hard to argue with that. I really haven't been happy. I was a big Iowa State backer before the year. And I think that even though Oklahoma's got struggles, if they don't shape up, Oklahoma's going to mop the floor with them in weeks to come. But talk to me about West Virginia. I wasn't overly high on this team. I remember in week 1 or 0, you were adamant about Maryland against them. That came through. But this team did beat TCU last week, which I thought was impressive. They've got an absolute workhorse in Letty Brown. What do you think about them today against this Iowa State defense?
Letty's similar kind of to like the Indiana backs, where he's getting a ton of volume, but it's not been efficient. A lot of that because their offensive line isn't very good. They returned a lot of players, but none of them were actually good into the year, which is something you and I focused on. You can't play the quarterback. Deggy is such a negative in the the run game, that he needs basically a 300-yard bonus to overcome that. And West Virginia slowed their pace. They're still really pass heavy, but they're so slow this year that he just hasn't been getting the attempts. And they've also started to use a really athletic Garrett Green to siphon off snaps here and there, kind of like how Notre Dame uses Buckner, which certainly hurts Deggy's ceiling. Not to mention they rotate 5 to 6 receivers on the field at any given time, and none of them are cheap. So West Virginia is a really hard team to get to outside of the contrarian Letty Brown. We didn't mention the Iowa State pass catchers, and I think stacking Purdy is viable. Kohler is one of the better values on the entire slate at his price. He's averaging about 60 yards per game on 7 targets, and he's just above 4K. So Kohler, I think, is certainly cash viable. Hutchinson's a little too expensive for his volume. I would just pay down for Kohler, and I expect Kohler to be pretty owned today.
Tariq Milton was someone I really thought would have a big role on this team. That hasn't come to fruition. That's not overly important here. Yeah, Charlie Kohler, I think, is going to be certainly cash viable. You mentioned the targets, good game environment. He should be busy today. I didn't bet this game. This is a tough game. It's ticked up to 7.5. Do you have a feel on who actually wins or covers?
I don't. I was hoping it would go the other way and go to 6.5 where I could get a nice number. So it's not going to be on my card.
I would agree. If you were looking for our cards, though, they are now free on the site, limited time only. Me and Matt's betting picks off of Betting You, our podcast on Wednesday night. You can find it in the college football tab each and every week. So if you are looking for our cards, we add to them throughout the day. Just a really fun addition to what we're doing here at Awesemo and for Awesemo odds as well. It's a perfect time to say, let's pump. We got a lot of people in here. This should be no problem. Let's see if we can pump these likes over 100, get the day started. We're making good time here. 7 up. We've got 7 more, and we're halfway through the show. Look at that. That is called efficiency, my friends. All right. We got Georgia. We got Florida. The game is in Jacksonville? Question mark?
Yes,
it's somewhere neutral.
It is in Jacksonville for sure. I noticed.
It is in Jacksonville, confirmed. Georgia's 14-point favorite, 51-point total. It's an incredible defense. What can you say? They don't give up a lot of points. We'll talk about Georgia's defense in a second, but every time we're on the show and on the slate, we ask, is it Stetson Bennett or is it JT Daniels? What is the situation for Georgia's QB today, and does that matter?
Yeah, they're both healthy, and they named Stetson the starter, which I think you and I kind of expected after Stetson played so well. His passing efficiency has basically been identical to Daniels, and then he's a dual threat. Their run rate's just really high, and they're 14-point favorites here. So you're not really projecting a lot of volume for Bennett. But if they get down, which is unlikely, there will be volume. Like Todd Monken, their OC, he's an air raid guy and he will push the ball downfield. He does a lot of really creative stuff with their tight ends, but they just haven't needed to do anything. They can just run the ball to win basically every game. I do think this will be one of their more competitive spots, playing in the easier side of the SEC. So, I mean, it could be a little more competitive than we think.
When you look at Georgia, is there anything to decipher in the backfield, or is it just a permanent situation that there's just too many mouths to feed? And even though Zamir White at times looks like the quote unquote alpha, he can never garner enough volume to justify it.
That's exactly it. They are without Milton today, so it's a 3-man committee down from 4. I mean, that does make it better, but is it better enough to target in DFS with Zamir White at 6K? Like, even he's priced up. Zamir White should be like a 5K player max splitting this. He's averaging 12 touches per game. So, they're just too expensive.
Last question for Georgia, and I don't think this is likely, but say they are trailing throughout the game. Is there anyone that could get there on a volume basis on the outside, Bowers or any of these guys?
Bowers would be number 1. It's really tough because they've been playing with a lot of their, I guess, projected starters. Like Jermaine Burton's been hurt. Arian Smith's been hurt. Even like Kyrus Jackson. So their 2 receivers that have played the most are Adonai Mitchell and Lad McConkey. Mitchell's really cheap. And if some of these guys were out, I would have more interest in him at 3.3K to save salary. But Burton's coming back this week. Arian Smith's coming back this week. We just have no idea how this receiver rotation is going to look. So there's a lot of uncertainty for an already really low volume passing attack.
On the other side, there's been some noise already about Anthony Richardson taking over here. He can cause some problems potentially on the ground. What do you make of it? I mean, he's going up against probably the worst defense that you could face in any regard, but is he still worthy of consideration today?
I think he is, based on his mobility. Like, he's just so dynamic. And I'm not expecting there might even be a time shift. So like Emory Jones hasn't been bad. Emory Jones' issue is turnovers. He's actually been very efficient as a passer. They essentially have the same passing statistics, but Jones is a larger sample. He just turns the ball over so much, and the Florida coaching staff's not going to deal with that. So Richardson gets the nod here, who's extremely athletic, efficient as a passer, albeit in a small sample. So he needs to extrapolate this moving forward. With that said, it's a tough matchup, but at his price point, we're starved for value. So if you can get like this elite dual threat before he breaks out, I don't expect it against this Georgia defense, but I have some Richardson too. I see some people in the chat. I definitely have some as a cheap dual threat. Like earlier today, before this news came out, I was playing a lot of like Columbi from Texas Tech. So I moved some of that over to Richardson. And like same thing on FanDuel, where I was playing a lot of Jordan Travis, move that over to Richardson. Some of it.
Naked?
Yes.
Okay.
The guy I would stack him with is Trent Whitmore, but he's questionable for the game.
As a pay down option, 33. If he plays, just to kind of tie it in, would you go him or Stovall?
Stovall.
Okay. And I assume we don't need to talk about, I mean, you'd rather take a 0 than try to play Malik Davis or Pierce.
They should pay you to play those guys.
That was a rebate. Okay. There we go. Easy enough.
Those are rebate plays.
Yeah. Rebate plays. That's how we roll. Spread feels about right to me. I lean over in the game. I think Georgia guts them up front. LSU ran wild against this Florida front. I think Georgia might do the same thing.
I agree.
Do we like McNamara over 11 fantasy points on Prize Picks? I can get down with that. I think there's scenarios where he's throwing today.
Me too.
Florida State and Clemson. This used to be the game. Now it's a fight to become bowl eligible. Florida State's a 9-point dog. Clemson at Death Valley, 47.5-point total. I mean, I don't know. I guess you could argue, if you're really trying to paint a rosy picture here, that Florida State is getting a little better. They are reeling off some wins. One of them was against UMass, but they did beat UNC on the road. Where are they at, though? You mentioned Jordan Travis. Is he viable? I assume you're running him naked. What is there to say about the Seminoles offense?
He's a much better play on FanDuel. He's just cheaper over there. 6.6 is a little much for like a glorified running back on DraftKings, but he's a lot of like touchdown equity. The spread's within reason here. It's a low total game overall, and Clemson's strength is defense, but you're seeing it within 10. So Florida State expected to keep it close. Travis, ultimately, he's been better as a passer this year. Like, he surprised me, completing 63% for 7.7 yards per attempt. I mean, he still needs a 100-yard game on the ground to get you the ceiling, but he kind of surprised me a little bit as a passer. He's been clearly better than Mackenzie Milton. And again, he's cheap enough on FanDuel specifically where that's where I would like to play him.
There's no way though, even though you have said that you think he's improved passing, like Parchment and these McDonald, like, is there someone that you would pair him with, or it's still predominantly, a run first approach?
If I was pairing him, it would be with either Keyshawn Helton or Malik McLean because of their price. Parchment's basically been benched at this point. I mean, you could use Cameron McDonald, the tight end, but I would rather not stack Travis. He does so much on the ground that their low volume passing attack you'd need like 2 touchdowns to get there in a GPP, I think.
Anything for Corbin in the backfield, or is just not enough volume?
He's already splitting with Trayshawn Ward and Lawrence Toafili. So Jordan Travis siphoning off even more work is not good for him at his elevated price point. He's only 300 less than Kenneth Walker.
On the Clemson side, I mean, they are just in straight disarray. Pitt handled them last week because Pitt's a better team at this point. So what's left they just are. What's left for Clemson? Where's this offense at?
So they don't have a clear starter at quarterback, and I think there's a very decent chance they rotate Uwal Galilei and Fomachan, which isn't good. Like Fomachan over his career is a 45% completion percentage, and that's usually in mop-up duty when their games are out of control. So that's certainly not good. But in the run game, Will Shipley coming back from injury. They don't have Lynn J. Dixon. He transferred. Kobe Pace got hurt in the last game. So it's just Will Shipley and fellow freshman Phil Maffa, who they have not given anything but change of pace touches. It's a pretty decent matchup. And with the quarterback controversy, you might see more running attempts. Shipley already has games of 20 carries. He just got injured, so we didn't get to see it over an extended period of time. And now these injuries are condensing opportunity against the Florida State team that's allowing over 160 yards to opposing rushers. It's not consistent. It's a really volatile situation, but Shipley does have a ceiling here, and he's only 5,700. So I have a decent amount of Shipley. I think he's in play for cash on FanDuel. He's a little riskier on DraftKings, but Shipley's a guy I think in tournaments who's worthwhile.
Nada is expected back. What does that do to this? Was this a spot we wanted to even look to the outside with Ross and Collins and these guys, or is it now even more complicated?
It's more complicated. I think Ross and Nada are the clear 2 guys you want to get to, and they're more FanDuel plays where Clemson's not priced up at all. On DraftKings, they're middling plays to below average plays, but on FanDuel, they're really cheap. EJ Williams is also back. Williams had like a broken hand earlier this year, so I have no idea where he's going to be. I don't know if he's going to split time with Bo Collins, Aju. Those are guys that have rotated in. So if you're punting off a Clemson receiver, I would rather play their tight end, Davis Allen, who for sure is going to have a larger role because Braden Galloway's out for the year with his concussion. So I think Davis Allen has more consistent snaps than Williams, Bo Collins, or Aju as the wide receiver 3. So the tight end would be my punt for Clemson.
Just so many guys, complicated situations. And I will say, if you were watching this and you're saying these are so many games, there's so much data, well, that's why you want to sign up for Awesemo Plus. And we've got that promo code CFB live before lock. It's going to get you 25% off your first month of Awesemo Plus Platinum. That's everything. That's all the sports that we've got. So when you look there, this is the data that Matt is using. He puts together the usage sheets that you've seen from him from years now. Really, really good stuff. We are housing it over on the awesemo.com homepage. So you go there, you get in college football mode. And we've got so many different packages. So no reason not to check that out. It can be super useful when we're trying to decipher a lot of guys that most people have never heard of. And there it is, 25% off your first week of Awesemo Plus Platinum, CFB LBL. Changing up. Thank you, Tyler, putting that on the screen. Easy game. There we go. All right, let's keep it moving. We're getting there. This is another big spread. Colorado and Oregon, 24.5 point spread for the home team here, 49.5 point total. Colorado is just awful. What go ahead, take it away. I've been disappointed with this team all year. They've cost me a lot of money.
They might be the worst Power 5 team. And
that's a hot take.
Would they beat Kansas?
I was going to say, are they the worst team? Do you think they're worse than Arizona?
Arizona covered against BYU, man. Like, I think Arizona's they're right there with Arizona and Kansas.
Honestly, well, we're going to get to it. I'll have a hot take follow-up on this very show about this, but go ahead.
Okay. Brandon Lewis might be the worst quarterback in the country. Jokes aside, like, Petrus is better than Brandon Lewis. So is Graham Mertz. Like, Brandon Lewis cannot throw the ball at all. So don't play him. Don't stack him. And Jarek Broussard is splitting time with Fontenot down the middle for a team that's implied for 12 points. Like, X out Colorado, then just move on with it. Oregon's a different story, though. A game manager extraordinaire, Anthony Brown. He's actually shown a decent ceiling here. Now they have a massive total. It's going to have to come on the ground here, but he's rushed for like upwards of 85 yards in a game. There is a ceiling because of this total, but I don't think he's the preferred option. Seems like a very narrow range of outcomes because of the low volume passing attack. But without CJ Verdell, Travis Dye has handled just an immense workload. And even last week, the workload wasn't necessarily like the best as they trailed a large portion of that game. They basically the entire first half, they were down to UCLA. But Travis Dye has a huge red zone role, punched in 4 touchdowns. He's a very good price adjusted play compared to the other really elite backs like with Dye and Bijan and Vaughn and Jerome Ford. Dye projects the best, and it's because he's the most active in the pass game. And there's nobody he's splitting touches with at all.
Yeah, with Verdell long gone now, Travis Dye is really just should dominate the touches. Of all the teams, and we look at a lot of teams where you say nasty situation, the Oregon pass catchers might be the nastiest. They literally have 20 guys out there. Is there anything that you can decipher of who should garner significant target share, or is it truly untouchable?
It's like one of the most whimsical things in college football. Like 2 weeks ago, Jalen Red, over 80% of the routes, goes right back down the last week. Devon Williams goes up to 85% of the routes this week. No idea how it's going to look. Like Johnny Johnson's been the leading receiver at times this year. Micah Pittman, Chris Hudson. There's 5 receivers, and predicting one of them is just essentially playing roulette out there, not something worth targeting.
So just to follow up with Travis Dye, you mentioned him amongst those other backs. I mean, he is kind of that priority in that upper tier over guys like Hall and Ford, even Bijan, who's I know a little more expensive.
Yeah, they're all a little more expensive. He's the cheapest of the tier, and he also projects the best. So he's pretty clear option for me. I mean, everything works in his favor. Huge favorites. He catches the ball. Colorado's defense is allowing over 180 yards. Like Oregon, they have an outside chance at the playoff, and they need to slaughter teams to get in there coming out of the Pac-12. But they only have 1 loss, so they need to win these games. They need to win them like by large margins. I don't think they're going to take their foot off the gas.
They shouldn't have a loss. They should have won that game. Bad calls. That was not targeting on Thibodeau. But we move on. I move on. I'm a pseudo Ducks fan at times. Texas Tech, 19-point underdogs. Going to Oklahoma, 67-point total. Oklahoma almost got into a situation where they would have been part of the worst upset. I think that would rival App State, Michigan. I'm not even joking. Just pathetic, but they did win the game. We'll start with Texas Tech, though. Their coach, Dunzo, where's this team at going into Oklahoma?
They're not in a good situation. Luckily, they promoted their offensive coordinator, Sonny Cumbie, so I don't think there's going to be too much changing on offense. They named Henry Colombi the starter again. Donovan Smith played in their last game. Donovan Smith is like a pure dual threat gadgety type quarterback. Colombi definitely doesn't have a long leash, but he has a voluminous offense that, at least in the past, they've struggled with inefficiency this year. They're balanced to fairly pass heavy. He had one really good game, basically against TCU, and then he's been bad since. So I think Colombi, who projects well, would be viable in cash if I wasn't scared that he was going to get benched if he makes a mistake. Like if he throws an interception in the first quarter, that he might get benched. So I have him in tournaments, but I'm just not going to play him in cash because I'm really worried about the leash.
When you do go to him in tournaments, is it Azukama? Is it Geiger? Like who exactly does he pair up with?
And that Azukama is coming down in price. Like Azukama was seeing a straight alpha workload to begin the year. And since the injury, he's come back and he's been averaging 4 targets per game in their last 4, which is a big issue. Geiger isn't averaging, like he's averaging more because of the Azukama injury, but it's not much more. And when Azukama is healthy, like Geiger is clearly the wide receiver too. I think they're outside considerations in GPPs because we've already seen it. It's just been a few weeks since we have. And Texas Tech's offense has really struggled, hence the firing of their head coach. So I think they should just get back to what worked for them early in the year. Whether they do that or not, I don't know. We'll see, but at least we've seen it before. The run game, I think Sir Roderick is somebody like these people like to click on, but he's now in a 3-way timeshare with Taj Brooks coming back. So he's really hard to get to as well.
I assume Kenneth Walker firmly over him.
Yes. And in the chat, Gary brings up a good point. Their secondary has been getting torched. So that does work into the favor of Colombi. The one mistake in getting benched thing terrifies me. That's the only thing against him, really.
Yeah, I mean, Oklahoma, I'm not going to get off them now. I said before the season, I think they are the best team. And The only thing I can point to is that they still haven't lost a game. They've been close, but they are undefeated. They've made the move, of course, to Caleb Williams. The one thing, and I would assume that you're pretty happy to see Kennedy Brooks really start to assert himself on the ground. Let's start there, actually, because they are a sizable favorite. Is he firmly in play at 84? How does he compare to some of the backs we just talked about, particularly Travis Dye?
Yeah, he's a good play. And he's a little cheaper than Travis Dye. Huge total here. He's just going to need to get like multiple touchdowns, which is very much in play. They're implied for over 40 points. He just doesn't catch the ball whatsoever. And he has in the past, but for whatever reason, when Eric Gray's on the field now, it's in that pure third down pass catching role. So Brooks just doesn't have that. And he's not going to see it here. I think Brooks, the touches have been fantastic. It's just the fact that they're all coming on the ground, which means that he's going to need to get those touchdowns to eclipse a guy like Dye, who's active in the pass game as well. So it's a preference towards Dye, but Brooks is live in GPPs. I have him in tournaments because of this immense total. We can talk about Williams and the pass catchers quickly. Williams is very, very expensive on a slate where we don't have any value. So he's tough to get to for that reason. Better play on FanDuel, I think. But he's been efficient as a passer, efficient as a rusher. If you can find a way to get him, I think he's still a good play. Just he's cost prohibitive. In the receiving game, Mario Williams and Mike Woods were out last week, and they're both expected to return here. And they might get Theo Weiss back. Theo Weiss warmed up for their last game, but didn't play. So Marvin Mims, who took on a full-time role in their last week, I think he goes right back down to 50% of the routes. That's over a long sample. That is what Lincoln Riley has done with him. So I'm worried about Mims. Hazelwood's the only consistent option, but he's been inefficient. Like they play way too much Drake Stoops. Stacking Williams is really hard.
No doubt. And I mean, I get it. It felt like Oklahoma, naturally you're going to err on the side of caution when you're 40-point favorites last week. So I think they held some guys out that maybe could have played. It just makes it really difficult. You've mentioned I'm adamant that Mims needs to be on the field more, but it doesn't seem to be happening.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, but they are a sizable favorite. Good total. Definitely don't be afraid if you get to some Sooners today. All right, three more. We're in good shape here. TCU's a 3.5-point dog going to Manhattan, 58.5-point total. I want to actually ask you this on the fly. This is something I genuinely don't know. We saw during the week a little, maybe it was nothing. I thought I saw some things on Zach Evans potentially maybe getting out of town. It looks like that was fake news or whatnot. What's going on with Zach Evans? Is he okay? Is he good to play?
Yeah, he's been practicing, so it looks like he'll be out there. I would just keep your eye on this before the game, see if anything crazy happens, but we're expecting Evans. The way I read the situation was like he scraped his Instagram of all TCU things. I think he's been a little upset with his workload since he's been there, and he's a 5-star running back. Like he should have been handed the keys to the offense. I think some of these coaches don't realize, especially if you're not Alabama, Clemson, or Ohio State, getting a 5-star is a privilege. And if you don't treat them well, you're not going to get 5 stars in the future. So I'm fully with Evans there. Again, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but then you had their head coach come out in the media and talk about increasing their run rate. And I mean, there's a lot of coach speak, but it seems like to me that Evans was pissed about his workload. And then to not lose their best player, they're now going to increase their run rate. So I think Evans is fine. He's cheap. He's in that sort of like Kenneth Walker range where he already has a big workload. And now if it's going to increase whatsoever, he's a very strong play.
Anything else for this TCU team? I was really disappointed with their effort last week. Dugan, the pass catchers, or is it just purely let's see what Zach Evans can do on the ground?
Dugan's mobile, which props up his floor, but he just doesn't have a ceiling. He only is averaging 24.7 pass attempts per game. He only has one game above 300 yards, 2 above 30 pass attempts. Kansas State's going to depress your play volume. So unless you get that efficiency, it's not going to be there. And he just has such bad receivers. Outside of Quentin Johnston, who other teams are just dedicating enormous coverage to, like extra coverage, like these other guys can't get it done. And JD Spielman just retired. So Dugan's a tough sell. Johnson's too expensive to stack. Evans is the only play really for this TCU team.
On the other side of this game, Kansas State is always a tough team for us to talk about just because they play so slow. They're very methodical, but Deuce Vaughn is really just the do-it-all player there. So talk about him and the rest of this Kansas State offense.
Deuce Vaughn, same thing as Bijan, as Brees. He's used a little bit differently. Like he's the team's leading receiver in terms of targets. and the rushing volume is there as well. And then like the matchup should be fine here against TCU, who's been horrific in run defense. They've been really bad on defense overall. But Deuce at his price, he's just very cost prohibitive, and he doesn't really project better than Die. So getting him at this elevated price doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Skyler is cheaper than we've seen him at times, and he is mobile. He only has 7 yards rushing this year, but he's had over 405 in individual seasons before. I think that comes down to he was hurt earlier in the year, but he's still a little expensive for a really low volume Kansas State passing attacks. It's really hard to get to any of the Wildcats.
Yeah, it's been a tough team all year to get to them. I mean, that's just how they play, sub 60 plays per game. They are a favorite, and that's bad too, because if they are winning the game and controlling the pace, it hurts everyone. So I get it. It's just a tough one on a 14-game slate. Can you double stack Texas Tech? I would say yes. You just got to be prepared for a total nuclear meltdown if Columbia gets a short leash.
I think it's hard because they don't have a cheap option. So like, where are you going for your value? Like Columbia is pretty cheap, but you have to use Azukama and Geiger. Nobody else plays enough. So it's pretty tough to get there.
Yeah, that is a good point. You are funneled into those guys. It just still seems, total, it's like 16 for the 3. That's not brutal.
It's not going to be owned.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's a high leverage. You have run backs on the other side if you want to go Brooks, but I think it can be done in tournaments. So
I think it can be done too. I don't have it, but I'm not opposed to it.
Yeah. All right. 2 games up. And then, by the way, coming up next, normally the NBA strategy show usually leads into the show, but because MMA is in Dubai and that has already started, the NBA strategy show is coming up next on this very channel. EMAC, Gundacker, they got you covered. Good day of hoops. So stay tuned right after this. We're going to lead them right into a great day here at Awesemo. We've got Purdue 7.5-point dogs, Nebraska 53.5-point total. Purdue's been a weird team. They knocked off Iowa, but I think that says more about Iowa than it does for Purdue. What we do know is that they have an absolute true alpha on the outside in David Bell. We've talked about a lot of pay up running backs. What do you think about paying up for David Bell?
He's the best receiver to pay up for on DraftKings due to price. His target volume is extremely consistent. Purdue is an anomaly in the Big Ten West where they're extremely pass heavy and up tempo. So volume is there for David Bell no matter what. Middling matchup, Nebraska has defended some receivers fairly well this season, but the volume is going to be there for Bell. If you can afford him, he's somebody that you could consider in cash.
Anything else for Purdue?
They do have some cheap pass catchers that are in rotations. Like Jackson Anthrop is still really cheap. I don't love getting to him just because the volume is not consistent, but Payne Durham is their tight end. His volume's pretty consistent there too. Milton Wright's not really expensive. If I'm going to one of these punt guys, it's probably Jackson Anthrop, but because of price, but I don't love any of them. They're all running about 50% of the routes. Doru is pretty cheap too, but like he needs a lot of receptions, I think, just because they don't run the ball a lot.
On the other side, Nebraska, first of all, it seems like Nebraska's played 20 games already. They played every week. It doesn't matter. They played week 0. They had no buys for this team. Adrian Martinez, they've taken some tough losses at times. I actually think they're a pretty good team. I like them in the betting market today. I think they're going to win this game, possibly going away. But from a DFS standpoint, what do you do with the dual threat signal caller? Is there anyone to pair him up with if you want to go there?
Adrian Martinez, I think, is in play on most slates because of his mobility. He has some stacking options that are pretty cheap, like Samori Torre. He's their clear number 1. He's averaging 5.8 targets per game, which isn't great for his price, but he could be stacked. They used Levi Falk as their wide receiver 2 in their last game over Oliver Martin, Xavier Betts, Omar Manning. It's a 1-game sample, so we don't know if this is a trend moving forward or just a 1-game blip. But if you want to take a shot on Falk at 3,500, another dicey value option. Their running backs are a 3-way committee with Ramir, Jaquez-Yant, and Sevion Morrison. Adrian can be used naked. I'm completely fine doing that. If you're running like David Bell, Adrian on the other side, or like Doru, Martinez, I think that's fine.
Is David Bell in cash, or is it just lineup construction prevents that?
I don't have him in my cash lineup on DraftKings, on FanDuel. I don't have him there either, but I have plenty of him in tournaments. He was in consideration for cash.
It's going to be, yeah. I mean, I think, of course, his price on DraftKings is pretty appealing. He's a big-time receiver. I think they'll be trailing. It's just, opportunity cost is immense on a slate that's really devoid of major value, as we've talked about consistently here. All right, let's get to the last game. I alluded earlier. I said, I kind of have a hot take. The worst of the worst in these conferences, of the big time conferences, is Duke. Duke is awful. And they are a 16-point underdog at Wake today. I bet Wake Forest. I think Wake Forest is going to crush them. Let's talk about the Blue Devils. They're coming off a stellar effort where they scored as many points as I did against Virginia. That would be 0 points. What is there to say about this team? Wake gave up 56 points last week to Army. They couldn't stop them on the ground. Does that mean that someone like Mateo Duran is just going to run wild in this situation, or are there other things to notice?
I mean, they have a good total. The overall total in the game is 71.5. Just for your reference, like Duke's implied team totals way ahead of like Wisconsin, Iowa. It's a pretty middle, like it's ahead of Miami on this slate, the Miami Hurricanes. Like Duke is a good total. With that, Gunnar Holmberg projects fairly well. He's pretty mobile, 183 yards on the ground. If he's a little more expensive than Brock Purdy, so I think like this Duke team could implode. As you mentioned, they have multiple times this year, which makes Purdy, I think, a safer option. But Holmberg has a lot of things working for him and like cash style builds. They have a ceiling. Duke is the third fastest team in terms of tempo in the country. They're run heavy, but their overall play volume props up Holmberg's pass attempts. Like the dude has a good ceiling overall, and Wake Forest has not shown a strong defense. So Holmberg's in play. Mateo Durant benefits from that enormous run rate. Like the guy 2 weeks ago, he had 45 touches in a single game. He's averaging well over 100 yards on this really bad Duke offense. And then Wake Forest, they couldn't stop Army's triple threat option run game, and you know what's coming at you every single play. So Durant's a good play. And then in the receiving game, like this volume stems down to the pass catchers. The only guy with a consistent role is Bobo, who's only 5,600, but he's averaging 9.5 targets per game. That's extreme volume, and he's certainly cash viable at his price.
Yeah, I mean, I will say Wake Forest is 102nd in the country in rushing yards allowed per attempt, 5 per carry. That's very, very bad. The problem is, I mean, this is good for DFS. I think Wake Forest is going to score early, often. Duke is north of 100 in all the categories. They've given up a ton of points to everybody. Everybody they've played, they get up 33 points to Kansas. Virginia beat them 48-0 last week. They lost to Charlotte in week 1. How do you attack Wake Forest, who seems like they could easily be the highest scoring team of all the teams we've talked about?
That's for sure. And Christian Beale Smith's a great GPP play. I think you could even run Christian Turner and Justice Ellison. They're very game script dependent, and now they're 17-point favorites. So when they're up in games, they will run the ball incessantly. With that said, when they're down in games, that's when they have really high pass attempts. And competitive games, same thing. So that's why Hartman has been so good of late. But there's a very real chance they just take the air out of the ball this week and use that three-way committee at running back with so many expensive options and players that, I mean, like Deuce Vaughn and Bijan, there's such an opportunity cost to your lineups. Like getting a Christian Turner who averages 9 touches per game, or a Justice Ellison he's a little more expensive. Turner, I think, would be the guy you go to. Getting nearly 10 touches per game at 3,200, like that is locked in. He's going to get those kind of touches today. He probably still needs a touchdown to get you there, but as far as punt options, Christian Turner is in play.
Anything else from this game? I
mean, Jacqueline Roberson, A.T. Perry are straight alphas. Could potentially suffer from low volume, but they're phenomenal plays if the game's competitive. Taylor Morin is also popping in just some really cheap builds because he's 4,100 and he's a clear wide receiver 3.
It's not staying competitive. Wake Forest big today, 3-4 plus touchdowns. I really like this spot, but we will see. That's why they play the games. And again, if you want more betting, Awesemo Odds YouTube channel. We are pumping. We are about to hit 2,000 subs, which is very exciting for us. Growing really quickly over there. Me, Matt, the whole team, breaking down process, use an odd chopper, a lot of tools over there that can really help. A couple questions on the way out. McCulley or Colombe?
Colombe.
33 and under best flex play. I know it's ugly. Is it Stovall from the very first team we talked about?
I think it has to be.
Yeah, it's just not that much there. One FanDuel, Travion or Bijan, GP pay.
Travion.
And look at that. Our man, Mr. Xander Tyler, throwing up the betting cards there. You can see some of my dangerous bets. Matt, your card is enough to feed a small village. You got about 30 plays over there. So if you want to have some fun.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it's more than
them
me.
All on like Monday.
So I
don't remember.
It's hard to remember all of this, but there you go. More quality here from our college football product. And it's because of you guys. We really enjoy doing the show. So we appreciate you. Hit that like button on the way out. subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned. NBA strategy show coming up next. Good luck today. Talk to you guys soon.